Hey, Power Dragon. Just want to stop by for a second to say, hey, while on break, thanks for stopping by. Just getting started here. Haven't dug into the brainstorming yet. Missed last week, so excited to be back. Excited to come up with some cool new game concepts. And yeah, I don't know what today's stream will hold, but we will find out. Greetings, game biologist. Great to see you in chat again. Yeah, last week I was in upstate New York at my husband's family's house. Internet there is a little more dodgy than it is here, so unfortunately wasn't able to stream. Oh, also babysitting our niece and nephew and going to an awesome place called Wonderworks it's in this huge mall in Syracuse, I think, called Destiny. The mall is like 5 stories, and it has this place, Wonderworks, has an indoor ropes course and a laser tag and like amusement rides inside the mall. So it's this crazy thing. Went on the ropes course. It was very terrifying. Basically, I'm kind of afraid of heights. So you get out there, you're in a harness, and you like feel good about it, but then you step out and you look down, you're in a mall, right? So 3 stories of mall to the tile floor below, and the ropes, you don't have handrails, so you're just like walking along and holding on to the rope that's supporting you, and it was very scary. I forced myself to keep doing it because it's basically a meditation, right? It's like deep breaths. Be comfortable with discomfort. This is my mantra for the week. Be comfortable. Wow, that's not even close. Comfortable with discomfort. Where's my angle here? It's a little low down. Can't really see that. I'll type it out too so you can see. Senor Bob, welcome to the chat. Good to see you. I also say get comfortable with discomfort. This is something that I've talked about a little bit in relation to game design, game marketing in the past. There's a lot of stuff that's hard about design or creativity or anything where you're trying to learn something new or stretch the bounds of what exists. It doesn't feel great all the time. It feels uncomfortable. And there's no real way to get around that unless you just like I think some people it's easier to compartmentalize. You get into the mindset like I'm going to do something new. Doesn't really matter if I succeed or fail, I'm just going to do it. I think that's a good mindset to have. For me personally, I get very attached to things, I get very emotional about things sometimes, so I can feel this discomfort very strongly. Like when I'm working on something, very excited about the concept, especially the themes, a lot of the stuff we're working on here, like, oh, this is such a cool idea. With a couple weeks ago, we did the food truck post-apocalyptic rival Thunderdome game idea. I'm like, oh, so much juicy, exciting stuff going on there. But distilling it down and making it into a game and making it simple, making it accessible and fun and readable and emergent in complexity and all that, it's a very complicated task. And there can be a lot of road bumps along the way. So part of the practice, the Game Design Daily, the doing these brainstorming exercises and putting ourselves in this unstable, uncertain mental place is meant to help build up that comfort with uncomfortable feelings. Wonderful Glory, good to see you. What are my thoughts on a deck builder micro game? It's funny that you ask about this because we're just talking about micro games on Twitter and what you would define as a micro game. So some might say the 18 cards. So the Button Shy classic micro game is 18 cards. That's the metric that Button Shy uses. I think that you can go a little above that. So my game Heart Catchers is 20 cards. I would still call that a micro game. Maybe up to as much as 30 or 40 cards could probably get into that boundary. It's a very interesting question. So Abandon All Artichokes is deck building distilled to its simplest components. Definitely one of the simplest deck builders I've seen. It has, I gotta say, 9 times 6. I was like, what is the whole thing? 9 times 6, because it has 54 of the power cards, and then 40 artichokes. It's gone down from 5 players to 4 players. So that's with the whole aspect of it that you're getting the artichokes out of the game. So like the trashing is the main part of the game. So if you weren't doing that part, I could see making a game in that 50 card space. I think you could push the boundaries a little bit of what it means to be a deck builder, because most decks you start out with something simple, and then you're purchasing cards either from piles or from a shared market that are going into your deck. For a starting deck, you're going to need some cards, maybe in the one hand. If you're doing 5 card hands, might start with 5 cards and your hand is your deck. That could be kind of interesting. However, in that case, you kind of need the individual cards to be kind of chunky and meaty. So you might be able to push a deck builder in that direction, where each of the cards does something pretty unique and interesting. Because that's the thing about Abandon All Artichokes 2, is there's only 9 types of cards, 6 of each card. So it's 54 plus 40, that's 94 cards total in the game at this point. So if you were, and it has all the artichokes, you don't really do anything, same types of cards, very simple. I think you could push it in a more complex direction, and focus more. You gotta be shorter, you gotta be faster, which I think is nice for deck builders, just something that goes by pretty fast. Wow. Fantasy Realms is not a deck builder, but if you're looking more at hand tuner or hand builder, I think that might be better suited to a micro game, and I think that's a very interesting space. All unique cards, they all have very interesting synergies with each other. Worry less about the reshuffling and putting cards in, or maybe some sort of combination, like Fantasy Realms-esque game where you're tuning in the types of cards that you're putting together really matter, but making it in that space where you're only going to end up, if you want to go up to 4 players, right, you do the math here, right, what end size deck do you want to have? If it's going to be 10 cards in people's decks, so that's 40 cards right there. If it's going to be 7 cards in people's decks, that's going to be 28 cards. That's really going to determine, do you want all the cards to be used every game? Is it only going to be a 2-player game? That opens up the space definitely for having a little more flexibility there. If you're going through all the cards every time, the cards themselves and the interactions between them definitely have to be very interesting. So that's a good question. I think it's a very interesting design challenge. I think what you end up with might not necessarily be recognized as a traditional deck builder, but I think you can come up with some pretty cool stuff. Email just says, years ago I had a woman come talk at a conference about how to broaden your audience and bring in new demographics. She said something that stuck with me. If you're comfortable talking to the people you're talking to the wrong people. It's a touchstone to remind me that growth means pushing against the boundary of your comfort zone. It helps me do things I don't think I can do. Oh yeah, every panel I've ever done, I've never gone to a panel and been like, I'm an expert in this subject. Spoiler alert. I definitely do panels where I think I have a lot to share. But I often put myself on panels where I think everyone else is smarter than me, for better or worse, because I feel like I can learn a lot from people. And it's also helpful to have that one person who can be the sounding board and act as the everyman, right, to kind of I think, sidebar, we're going to get back to the deck builders because that's also very exciting. The sidebar for this comfort, discomfort thing, if you have, talking about talks in particular, if you have everybody who's talking be just like the smartest people in the room who've been doing what they're doing so long that they've lost touch a little bit with what it's like to be a beginner in the field, it can be a conversation that's much more limited than if you have a broad range of people. And this is, again, why diversity is very important. Diversity in like gender, experience, racial diversity, all types of different diversities to bring different experiences together so you can play off people. Wonderful Glory says, I'm uncomfortable talking to everyone except my partner. Yeah, I used to be super shy. I still am in some ways. Like, I think as I've gotten older, some of the just... my mind would blank, really, was the scariest thing. And that happens less. I've become more comfortable with just letting my mouth run until eventually my brain catches up again. But yeah, high school, I had some friends, but I would like literally just sit in the corner. I never ate in the cafeteria. I ate in the cafeteria maybe once during high school because I didn't want to, there's just like a lot of people there. I didn't want to deal with the politics of high school. So I would go and sit out on the stairs. We had a really nice campus with like some different buildings. So you could go down, there's a little river there you could go down by, or like the stairs by the science building or whatever if you wanted to get away from people, which is kind of nice, you know. They never really corralled us too much, but yeah, it's something that gets easier with practice over time. Supposedly, it still feels like it doesn't necessarily feel better. I think that's an important thing about becoming comfortable with discomfort. You're like, oh, eventually it will just feel better. It'll be easier. Not necessarily. You know, it's kind of like anxiety or depression. It's the kind of thing that's ebbs and flows. It's always kind of there in the background. It's your reaction to it, which is what you have control over. Senior Bob says, I'm really bad at going outside my comfort zone. It's usually a really awkward feeling and makes me want to flee. Yeah. And this is something that I want to surface and share with people and get out there because it feels awkward. You know, it's like just all of the physical stress reactions, you know, like racing heart. For some people, like I mentioned with me, my mind blanks, so which makes it even harder, right? I'm trying to have a conversation with someone and I start to stutter or just like stop in the middle of my sentence because I don't remember what point I was trying to make. Physical feelings and then emotional feelings as well, like everyone's staring at me, like I'm not sounding very smart, people are talking over me, they're not listening to me, there's so much that's kind of wrapped up in there. And again, I think some people just are natural or feel naturally comfortable with it, but for people like me, it's an ongoing practice of doing the thing, even streaming. You know, I don't know how natural this comes off to other people. I've been doing it for a few months now, so it's a little more comfortable than it was in the very beginning. It helps having people actually in the chat and not be talking completely to myself. But yeah, I get that a lot. I think it's important to think about the things you can control and the things you can't control. Like your feelings, don't have a ton of control over that. You know, I wake up in the morning, I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm sad, or whatever. Those are emotions that I can mitigate, but I can't just be necessarily, without a lot of practice, you know, like I'm just going to be happy now. But I can do the actions, I can do practices, I can do breathing exercises, short like micro meditations for just like close my eyes for a couple of minutes, I can do things like streaming. I can set up more chats with people. If you can have some low impact conversations with people at a convention, or even just, like going to stores, going to grocery store. This is the most awkward thing. When I was growing up, my mom in the grocery store, she'd just be standing in the produce aisle and start talking about the watermelons with other strangers in the grocery store, and I wanted to die. She's like talking to them like, oh my gosh, this is so awkward. Why are you talking to this person? This is the worst thing ever. But now I've gotten to be the point where I'm a little more comfortable talking with strangers. Working in retail absolutely helps with that, because you have to do that. Working at conventions, pitching your games, you have to do that. Play testing your games, you have to talk to strangers. So doing little exercises and practices like going to the grocery store, striking up a conversation with the cashier, and a lot of it's super awkward, but can feel more comfortable over time. Game Biologist just says, I worked at a state park in college, collecting money at the front gate, and developed a skill I call happy ranger smile. Oh my gosh, I love it. I go back to that when I have to do uncomfortable zone things. Smile on the outside, Van Gogh's scream being reenacted on the inside of my skull. The customer service smile. Yeah, the happy ranger smile. I like that better than customer service smile, actually. So think about that. And just so many times when someone is complaining or doesn't understand your game, or you're just like, someone else is socially awkward who you're talking to and you're trying to mitigate the situation, just like smile. And if you keep smiling and breathing, and maybe pause for a moment, or ask a question to let the other person take over a conversation, put some of the burden on someone else, and you can center, and give yourself a moment and just trust that you'll be able to come back into, because it's not, what's the worst that can happen? It could be bad stuff. You can completely shut down, and like flee. You're in the middle of a convention, having a conversation with a publisher, and you just like lock up and freeze and like flee the building and the state and never go back to that convention ever again. But that's pretty unlikely. What's likely to happen is, you freeze up, you forget what you're going to say, and people naturally fill the silence, right? So someone else will be there to catch you and help you. Senior Bob says, parents, am I right? Ugh, tell me about it. Pet peeve. Going through self-checkout and the attendant starts socializing with me. Yeah, that's like that, or like taking an Uber or a Lyft, talking to a person. I think there's definitely different points of emotional energy throughout the day. You might be feeling more talkative or less talkative, and someone else impinges on whatever state you're in, kind of tries to force you into a different state of activation. And I agree, I definitely used to feel that as well. I think now, again, trying to practice this and seeing every interaction as a potential to get, it's like riding a bike or something, right? Someone's talking to me. How do I respond to them? How do I make it a good experience for both of us? And I think it actually comes back to experience design and game design, and the back and flow interaction of conversation has a lot of ties into game design and experience, and how volleys, right? Like, how does conversation work? Are we antagonistic? Are we cooperating on this conversation? Or is someone trying to dominate the conversation? Do we have different goals, or are goals aligned? There's a lot of stuff, and a lot, I think, that you can learn from random interactions with people. Game biologist says, speaking of managing discomfort and game mechanics, real world psychology. If you smile, you'll make yourself feel happier. True. If you're talking to someone, you'll start to mirror their actions and posture. What about a game where you're trying to get your partner into a better headspace by playing sequences of cards that pull them? That sounds lovely. I mean, so we were talking about some stuff here, and I think that conversation, I think we can actually put some of this stuff into a mind map. They're all very mental, psychological things, but I think there's a lot of interesting space, game design space, to play around with here, especially evoking emotions. I'm actually gonna copy this. And we try to do brainstorming here and open up ideas and come up with a lot of things, but I think this one, the mirroring, doing either, I mean, it could be a parlor game, it could be a cardless actual as a game of like smiling or frowning, you know, a facial expression game. Or more traditional with a board of cards or tokens that you would play. Emojis, maybe? I don't know about that. Facial expression game. Or more traditional games. So a lot of stuff to play around with here. Speaking about evoking emotions in particular, I played Holding On over the weekend. I was pretty excited to play this because it's playing in a space that a lot of other games don't investigate. In case you haven't heard about it, Holding On is a game in which you play the care staff for Billy Care. The full title of the game is Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Care, I believe. So you're the hospital staff. It's a campaign game. So not legacy, like you're actually tearing stuff up. You do add stuff to the game over time. So it's like a legacy-ish. Going through a bunch of scenarios, and you're unraveling the story of Billy's life. Billy is dying, so there's definitely a content warning there. It's not a happy story. It's not like you can save him. You are just trying to unravel a story and help him deal with his regrets before he passes on. So I think this is an amazing design space and emotional evocation space to explore. There's a lot of stuff mechanically going on in the game. I think for me it's interesting because I see where this game came from. It's a gamer game. It's a hobby cooperative game. And what that means to me, it's like it's targeted more towards hobby gamers and more casual gamer. There's a fair amount of setup to it. There's a lot of different things going on. There's a little bit of a learning curve to it. It plays out a lot like Pandemic in a way, where you're like, things are getting worse and you're shuffling through different decks trying to find particular cards in this scenario. And trying to manage a deteriorating state as you go along and achieve the objective before inevitable crash, right? For me personally, and I want to play it through it some more times, I think having some more comfort with it might change the experience, but it's just too mechanical. Like, just based on the pitch of the game, I had this vision. You know, it's like you're finding the story, something lightly mechanical, something storytelling, like Billy would tell something. So the game would be more akin to the digital game, That Dragon Cancer, where you're really feeling Billy's feelings. That didn't, because of the mechanics of the game, it didn't quite come across for me. I also felt it was a little Dixit-ish with the cards. The cards, I have to make sure I'm not spoiling anything here. The cards have quotes on one side and then an image on the back of them. Like these cards that you're going through. And there's partial memories and clear memories. And the partial memories, there's in each deck, the same card is repeated. So there's would be a partial memory and a clear memory that sits on top of it that's the same. And the partial memory has very vague art, and then when you get the clear memory, it has the full picture. So it's kind of a cool mechanic where you're unveiling these pictures over time. But the quotes are pretty vague, I think intentionally. So it's like, I was so happy to see her. You know, something very short like that. So, and this, like, I don't know who the her is. Like, is it a daughter? Is it a mother? Is it a spouse? You know, and with all of the quotes kind of being like that, and the game is also very historical with the story that it was telling. And knowing that section of history, I inferred a lot about it. But if I hadn't known about it, there would have been even less context to the story. So it's got a lot of interesting things going on, but what my brain has been chewing on is how much design space, empty design space, like waiting design space there is for really emotional, evocative games, things you can just dive into, things that could be very accessible for non-gamers to have non-traditional emotional experiences. Non-traditional emotional experience. So things, like I say, frustration is a pretty traditional gamer experience. Thrill of victory, strategy, like seeing a well-laid plan come to fruition are pretty common emotional experiences, like emotional / logical experiences. Things like, you know, sadness, like contentment, fear, I guess, joy. You know, you could say like games have like winning, and there's a joy to that, but joy not tied to winning. You know, I think there's a lot of emotions that can be explored in games, and they can be explored in such a way that you just feel it. You know, it's like you start playing the game and all of a sudden you feel like drinking a warm cup of tea. Oh man, one of the ideas on my game list is I want to make a game that feels like drinking hot cocoa and sitting in front of a fireplace on a cold winter day. That's the whole inspiration I have for the game. So I think this is a really cool space to design in. And I don't know what I want to make here yet, but for me and for anyone else who wants to design something, I think this is a really cool space to design in. Anyways, enough of that rant. Wonderful Glory says, I wanted to like that Dragon Cancer more than I did. Yeah, I haven't actually played that Dragon Cancer. I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, I guess. Just the scenes, I saw some scenes, even just seeing like a little bit of a playthrough, I was like, I already feel, it feels very intense. But again, with the trappings of game to a thing as opposed to being just an interactive story, it does make me wonder about how that shapes the experience of it. And can it be solved? You know, can a game, something that most people would define as a game, evoke these emotions? Senior Bob says, pandering a little, I imagine, and then we died sparks conversation. Yeah, I think, and then we died has that vibe of storytelling, conversation. There's a lot of, it doesn't create one specific emotion. Like, it's about death. You might think that it would evoke sadness or fear, but it doesn't really. The stories mostly end up being humorous, but as Phil and I were talking about the other day, they end up being dramatic because you need to up the stakes. Because the goal at the end of the game is for everyone to die. So a lot of traditional role-playing games, you're trying to mitigate, right? You're trying to keep everyone alive, to protect, and that can have unless your players are willing to open up and take some chances and take some risks, or the DM, like my DM recently, is willing to just like blow up your well-laid plans and just throw things at you that you can't even handle, you become kind of risk averse. Whereas "and then we died" is the opposite. What's the opposite of averse? Risk. Risk averse versus risk positive. Yeah, so that, and I think if you're looking for, again, emotional experiences, it is risky, and it can be intense, and I think that's why it's a difficult design space, because not only do you have to design the game itself, you also have to design mechanics to lower barriers and encourage risk-taking. Game biologist says we had to play a game during a training session on communication styles where one partner got a style feeling, acting, creative thinking, and started a conversation with their partner in that style and tried to see if they could read their partner well enough to bring them to the same communication style. Ooh. Communication games, yeah. It's weird. It's the kind of thing that ends up becoming team building exercises. You don't see them come as much, at least to the hobby game market. I think there's still not prejudices necessarily, but you still have pretty solid pockets, niches, I guess I would say, of gamers and the styles that people usually do. This hobby market is all pretty similar, and the mass market over here, the kids market. And if you're in one of those niches, you might not necessarily see as much that's going on in the other niches, but this style of kind of serious theme-wise, but not mechanics-wise. So something with the mechanics of a mass market game. And for those of you who don't know, mass market games, when you're pitching to a company that sells to mass market, and as you Target, Walmart, like large retail sites like Amazon, the types of mechanics and the level of complexity that those companies, publishers generally looking for, or the stores are looking for, much simpler games, or certain terms and certain mechanics that don't really work as much for mass. Those lines are blurring. So if you go to a Target or a Barnes & Noble now, you'll see plenty of hobby games on the shelves as well. But they're still kind of separated out into hobby games and then mass market games. So like the theme of something that would feel like a hobby game, and then hobby level theme with mass market mechanics. Wonderful Glory says, watching the game is very cool. Playing the game feels clunky. Interesting. We're referring to that Dragon Cancer now, which, yeah, I didn't go over what the game is, but, the designers of the game, I believe, were parents of a child who had cancer, and I believe died. So, yeah, super intense, and it's the story done in a very, like, watercolor style and kind of fragmented memories about instances in the diagnosis and the treatment. Yeah, very intense, but I could see this, as Wonderful Glory is saying, with the gameplay feeling clunky. takes you out of it. What Remains of Edith Finch, Tacoma, Gone Home, and The Beginner's Guide do that kind of game much better. Okay, that's interesting. Gone Home is amazing. I think that's a great example of a digital game that does story really well with having a game. The atmosphere is great. I thought it was going to be a horror game. Phil bought the game for me, and I said to him, if something jumps out at me and like bites me in the face, you're going to be in trouble because I don't like scary stuff. But it was just creepy enough. It's not about horror or anything, but it's still a very creepy experience. It tells a great story. Beginner's Guide, also amazing game by one of the creators of the Stanley Parable, I believe. Very strong, intense story. Great narrative. Great blend of narrative and game mechanics, which is tough to do. You can tell that Dragon Cancer is a deeply personal expression by designers who want to share a story and a feeling more than making a smooth game experience. And that's a tough thing too, right? Game design is a skill. It's a skill that combines a lot of different disciplines, and as someone who's been working on it for a while, it's hard to do well. And even if you have a cool mechanic or a cool story, again, I have so many cool ideas, like the cats knocking stuff off of shelves, right? And I just have the vision of the experience. Like, I want someone to feel like the cat when they knock something down, and then they look at the owner and they're like, oh, that was fun, let's do that again. And the owner puts it back up and they knock it on the floor again. They're like, yeah, that's great, let's keep doing this. Or the owner's frustration with cats knocking stuff down, like this balance of glee and frustration. Like, I can see and feel that emotion very strongly, but tying it back into something mechanical and not having it be reductive or repetitive. That's really the crux of making these things be fun. Wow, we're getting really deep today. Thinking lately about this comfort-discomfort dichotomy, and holding on, and getting excited about making very emotional games. I think it's tough not to, and just wanting to push the boundaries a little bit. I think where I've gotten most hung up on designs, where I'm at, like, a lot of my designs, it's kind of weird. I have a lot of different things I'm working on. Some things are just smooth, moving on towards the end of the development cycle, but I definitely have a few games that have come to a block point or kind of broke themselves in a way I'm not entirely sure how to fix them. So with Split the Loot, I took away, there's a draft. Split the Loot, you have a hand of 4 cards, you're passing 2 away, you're keeping 2. Basically, it's the deck tuning, deck manipulation? What's the deck tuning game? It's trying to end up, like, pass stuff you don't want to your opponents and keep stuff that you want for yourself. And the mechanic is working very smoothly. It goes very fast at high player counts, got a lot of good stuff going for it, but the feeling that I'm trying to evoke with that game in particular is like a hoarding glee. Like, you have your Halloween candy and you're like looking at what you have and looking at what your siblings have, and like, oh, that Reese's peanut butter cup looks really good, I don't really like this thing. I wonder if we could trade those things. Or with a treasure, you're like, oh, mine's pretty valuable, but if I have a set of this, I can sell it for even more. So that greed, I guess, feeling of greed and self-interest and pain point of having to give away something, that might be making tough choices. So all that stuff is all that is stuff that I'm trying to work with now. I did a lot of simplification to speed up the game and make it smoother, but mostly the theme, like, it's treasure themed right now, and just making that exciting. It's kind of generic. So playing around. We had talked about Bowerbirds on here for Split the Loot, and I mocked up a few of the cards with that. But then that kind of changes it a lot. And it's like, do I like the idea of Bowerbirds building up their stuff, building up their bower, their nest to attract a mate, and getting all these cool items. Theoretically, sounds pretty cool, but for me as a player playing the game, not a bowerbird myself, you know, getting these handfuls, like, oh, I got some berries, I got some animal bones and some bottle caps, you know, it's hard for me to necessarily connect with those items emotionally. So yeah, there's, again, becoming comfortable with this discomfort of things being in weird places. And I think that's really sparked this, like, throwing everything to, like, more traditional set collection, throwing all that out and looking at this weird meta space of game design. I was going to make some more notes on our mind map. Evoking emotions, facial expressions. Awkward strangers. Happy ranger smile. Facial expressions as a resource. Facial expressions as a resource that generates emotion. Sounds kind of mechanical. Ooh, just lost my pen there. Facial expressions as a resource that generates emotions. You have a guide that shows you which emotions to create with your face. Maybe there's a bluffing element where you're trying to guess the emotions the other person is trying to generate without giving away your own. I do like this idea of mechanizing facial expressions. Just having to it makes me think of a staring contest or something along those lines. You're just like looking at someone and making faces, and that's the game. That sounds exciting and intense at the same time. Game Balder says, speaking of discomfort and cats knocking things down, add tail pulling cockatoos to your list of oddball mechanics. Oh, this is this is something I remember seeing that going around on Twitter with the birds pulling up the bird spikes, I think. Pulling up the spikes. That seems like the tail pulling. That's cool. I'll look into that some more. St. Rob says, this is sort of personal, but how about the topic of midlife crisis? Oh, actually, that is a good point. And I listened to the Ludology episode. I'm gonna forget his name, but one of the designers, or the designer of Fog of Love, talking about the sequels to that game. I don't remember what episode it was. This was a while back, but they were talking about the arc. So it's going to be a 3-game arc, starting with Fog of Love, which is the creation of the relationship. And then the next one being... Shoot, again, it's been a little bit of a while. There was one talking about, like, the maintenance of the relationship, and one of them was around the topic of midlife crisis and being in a relationship. So instead of the first Fog of Love, where you're creating and you're in this, like, falling in love stage, it's more about from a really, wasn't it like multiple people playing as a character or something? I'm doing a really bad job of explaining this, but at least one person is looking into it as a topic, and I think it's a very rich topic. And I think the thing about midlife crisis in particular is there's a lot of tropes around it, and there's a lot of not expectations, but kind of like tropes, or it's sometimes treated as a joke, like people make fun of things, or they're like, oh, X, Y, and Z always happens. I think there's a lot of rich emotional space, and even doing something mechanical, like starting with the idea. I think this is a cool idea, so we're going to do a quick sidebar for this, and maybe go with it, or maybe come back. And I think it doesn't just have to be midlife crisis. I think it's funny because, like, for myself, I think there's kind of a typical age when people might say that there's a midlife crisis, although now people talk about quarter life crises, and all those kind of things. So if you're looking at it like this particular age it happens, it's a little more limiting. But if you say your entire life you've been doing a certain thing for a while and you just feel stuck, and you look at your, like, is this going to be the rest of my life? And you're like, if this is going to be the rest of my life, I don't think I can live with that. And I think that's an experience that people at many different ages have had. I've reinvented my life multiple times and had that stuck feeling multiple times before. So I think it's a great core to start off of. And there's just so many directions you could go with this. I mean, you could go in the jokey direction, kind of talk about tropes, make it be like a party game. It's an option. I think maybe something a little more, I don't want to use the word sensitive in that way. I think a more interesting emotional direction to go in it would be not even necessarily using the word midlife crisis, or kind of coming at it from an oblique angle, and having it mechanically be something like, so you're just being super reductive for this, because just like it's happening in my brain as I'm drawing this down. It's like you're here and you want to get here. Or like you're here and something like, everything's on fire, right? But like a little bit of fire, or there's spikes, like minor discomfort. I guess you're not going to die or anything, right? So you're here and you just don't want to be here. Like, I don't know, think of like a grid or something. Like the grid, the spot that you're on is like negative 1,000 points, right? And it could be, I think part of the perception of this is evolving over, like, emotional evolution. I say emotional evolution and arc, because there's kind of an arc to it. Ideally there's a few potential arcs. You start out with, like, you've made decisions that you thought were going to put your life in a good position, and you've been pretty happy with where you're going, and then all of a sudden, and that's why they will say it's a crisis, right? Is that either maybe your life just has never been great and it's all come to a culmination, or maybe you felt pretty good about your life and then all of a sudden you see something about yourself, or you hear something and it triggers a realization in you. So you can come at it from a couple of different angles. But I like this idea, like you start out and everything's fine, maybe like shifting point values on a board. And this is just an abstraction of the concept I'm trying to come up with. And then all of a sudden you're in like negative 1,000. So where you are, you know it's really bad objectively, but you don't know what good looks like. I'm going to type this out in words because it might make a little more sense what I'm trying to say. Midlife crisis arc, we'll say. There we go. Things are fine. Things are categorically not fine. You don't know what fine looks like. So it's like, we know negative 1,000 points is bad. I don't know, without seeing the scale, I don't know how bad, but just like, yeah, things we can sense, like this is bad right now, but I don't know what good is. And that's when in the traditional, we're seeing it represented in the media or whatever, that's when you start to grasp at straws, right? So you still don't know what fine looks like, but you're reaching out, experimenting, almost like a second teenagerhood, but often with more money and power. Not always, though. So you're like trying to reach for different things, and then sometimes, like when I first drew this cube drawing over here, you see something that's good or something you think is good, but you don't know how to get there, right? Or you think you can't get there. You're like, oh, if I had a completely... There's a lot of dramatic, right? Dramatic thinking. I think part of the experience is this intensity and drama. And drama of emotion. You latch onto something that's good and will make everything better, but you don't know how to get there, or you can't get there, or you think you can't get there. Barriers in your way. So abstractly, you know, we're looking at the grid down here. This is bad. I like this. So you have your grid here. This is negative 1,000 points, and maybe this space is positive 1,000 points, but the mechanics say diagonal movement only. So you can go here, you can go here, you can go here, you can go here. You never get to that space. So recognition of goal, barriers to goal. I was gonna say if I could do like a 4A corollary, is this idea of disruption and reaction, going for things that are just not what you have right now, and then even throwing away the things you have right now for better or worse. So there's definitely this idea of it's just like, I don't know how to fix things, I don't know how to get from here to there, but risky behavior, I think, is a good way to put that. But I'm gonna do something, anything to feel something, to feel better. So like buying a really nice car, right? It might not be in your budget, you might have to go into debt, have to, like, people do bad things sometimes, steal from their kids' college funds, or, you know, they might run off with someone just because there are barriers to what they think they want. And I think a lot of the time, like, you aren't sure exactly what it is. You know, something like, oh, if you're in a rational state of mind, right, it's a very emotional thing. If you think about it rationally, it's like, oh, I'm just unhappy in my job, so I'm going to take the steps to explore maybe adjacent career fields, something that I can transition into over time. But more likely in the midlife crisis scenario, you're like, I'm gonna sell my house and quit my job and become a lifeguard in Maui or something just very different and very dramatic. Say achieving the goal, feeling better for a little bit, maybe not in the long term. But however, I think just by shaking things up, you can open up the pathways for better things. So for this arc, we have, it's like you get to the thing that you have. Chances are that thing won't fix. Like, I think a lot of times a midlife crisis can be a reaction to a lot of things that are building up and just staticness, right? Just like this unchanging, things are like this now and things are going to be like this until the day that I die. And just the act of, and disruptive and damaging to relationships, finances, potentially, but then the catharsis of that is just by getting things moving and by taking on risk, allowing change to happen, start emotional and creative energies flowing. So that's not really mechanical, any of the stuff we talked about, but I think it's really cool. I can't wait for the episode to come out on recent ludology. We're talking with Tom Lemon about story arcs, narrative arcs versus gameplay arcs, and how different they are and how it's difficult to represent this kind of story arc in a game. But I think by looking at the story beats or the story points, you can kind of mechanize this. Like I said, changing board state, the starting point, like where you are, if you're talking about a peace movement or a worker movement type of a game, where you are just becomes bad. So state changes, or a card you have in your hand, all your cards are bad. You start with all unhappiness cards or something, right? And maybe you have like a hidden goal. Cards. So there's just one example of a way to mechanize something like this with all unhappiness cards. You have a hidden goal. You acquire a bunch of cards you think will make you happy compared to hidden goal. And then you can do something tricky, like your hidden goal is always one of your starter cards. You're like, all these things are making me unhappy. And then you see at the end, it's like, oh, I just wanted to be closer to my family the whole time, you know, and instead I went out and bought a Ferrari. Yeah, there's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it's a really cool topic, and I think there's ways to explore it more narratively. So doing something like Holding On, where you have this experience. So what Fog of Love does to, like, relationships is, like, all about building a relationship. You do something like that. That's more about the narrative, or you do something that takes from the concept and from the theme and then mechanizes it a little bit more. Game says, for my midlife crisis, I went back to college for an MA in serious game design. That's super cool. Every time I see something that you've written, I'm like, did I know that? Just like more and more cool stuff unwinding all the time. Had lots of low-level panic attacks about that for the first few months. Wow, that's intense. You know that dream about forgetting to go to class all semester and then showing up for the final exam? I had a lot. I still have that all the time. Oh, I can't imagine what it would be like to have those and still be going back to school. I have this dream too, and I'm not even in school. Right? I know, right? It got better over time. That's great. It's that whole hard fun part of Nicole Lazaro's 4 keys to fun theory. 4 keys to fun theory. You level up as you start to understand concepts. Absolutely. Maybe everyone has cards with emotions, and everyone has cards they are trying to collect. Alright, we're getting back to the facial expression goal game, which I like that too. Collect, they make a face, and then everyone gives them a card, either based on the emotion or maybe they're trying to get you to give them that emotion. I still love this faces thing. I want to tie back into this. Shut Up and Sit Down did a review of the Midlife Crisis Fog of Love. So is that out yet? I guess. Okay, I didn't know that. It's a pair of players playing each character, one player the ego and the other player playing the subconscious. Okay, right. They said it fell a bit off, and the most interesting interactions were always within a character rather than between characters. Your partner felt a little superfluous. Interesting. Yeah, you see, and this, again, it's hard. And that's why it's so exciting, right? There's, I think, honestly, something like The Mind, I feel, has come closest to getting some of this gameplay loop of, like, calm and then intensity as far as emotions inspired in a game. I think The Mind is one of the best ones I've seen do this. And I think there's I keep saying this, but I want to play these games, and that's why I'm so encouraging of people to design games like this. Like, I want to sit down, I want to feel these things in a game experience. You usually, like, you see it from watching a movie, right? You get the feeling from reading a book, seeing a play, having a conversation with someone. I think that the interactivity of games role-playing games. I mean, I think that's a perfect example of something mechanized. We had a session last night that was very intense, and you can get a lot of great emotions there. So if you can do it in role-playing games, I think it's something that you should be able to transition to other types of ortho games as well. Senator Bob says, I think if you're younger, it's a future life uncertainty crisis, or maybe not so young. Yeah, that's a good point. Designation between midlife crisis and, I guess, younger life crisis. looking ahead, like not sure, the uncertainty. That's a good point. Uncertainty. I think the key characteristic of midlife crisis is that you recognize exactly where you are now, and you're not worried about things being uncertain or what the future will look like. You're worried that the future will look exactly like this. You don't know if you can live with that. Imelda says, it's weird that we talk about a midlife crisis, which has historically been perceived as a male phenomenon, and the change of life, which has historically been perceived as a female phenomenon in completely different tones. A crisis is traumatic and jarring. A change is a gentler process that won't end where it starts. Run a food truck. Wait, is that... Wait, when you say run a food truck, is that what you're doing? Yeah, sorry for there seemed to be a post there, but it should be taken care of now. Alright. Midlife crises, changes of life. I think too, looking too closely at taking something that is narrative, that is a story arc, being too literal, really, with the ideas, like saying, I'm going to make a game that is X. You know, I'm going to make a game about my experiences or a person's experiences playing in a indie rock band and touring from city to city. I think with a lot of things it goes too literal, too narrative, and you're telling this one story, and then if you try and add game mechanics to it, you know, it can kind of branch off, but you're trying to mechanize that and incentivize certain things and score different things. It can be hard to keep it in that narrative experience. And if you just go have a light theming to something and then just go really mechanical, you're not going to get the emotional experience from it. So I think that's where the trickiness of the design comes into balance, really, of the emotional / experience, and putting in, and I think it's just like a seasoning, right? It's like a light touch of a light spicing of mechanics to make the choices that you're making interesting. Senior Bob says, that's been my midlife change urge. Oh man. It's funny, I've been thinking about food. I've been thinking about food a lot lately. I think about food all the time. Food is great. And just because what was it? We went to a Vietnamese burger place, and they had banh mi burgers. And they also had stuff like pho. So I got the pho. We got some drinks. Phil got a spicy lychee cocktail, and it had a lychee as a garnish to it. He doesn't like weird things as much as I do, so I ate the lychee, and I was like trying to get him to eat it. I'm like, it just tastes so different from anything else. It's like, it tastes like a flower. He's like, why do I want to eat a flower? It's like, you want to eat it because it like tastes different. Or I mean, it makes me think of the scene with Remy in the the rat cooking movie. I can't believe my brain is blanking right now. Ratatouille, of course. Ratatouille, where the music is happening when you marry the flavors together, right? There's something there. I think, I love cooking, and I love pairing these flavors the idea of being a chef or being in a food truck and just doing it over and over and over again is the routine of it, right? Like the grind, just the dexterity, the physical acts. Like you're doing the physical things all day. It sounds like it repetitive, might get kind of repetitive or boring. But there's also, like when I worked at the board game store, there's a lot of stuff like every day, go through the shelves, face the shelves, adjust the games, pick up things, put them in the right places, restock the shelves. And a lot of that, when you're doing it, doesn't really feel repetitive. And you do that, you go in there, you do your shift, you do your thing, and then you get to go home and not worry too much about it. Of course, if you're running a food truck, you're doing the marketing, you're doing politics over who gets to park which food truck where, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But I can say that too. It seems like it could be a pretty interesting, compelling thing. Game Biologist says, how's this for very literal? The change of life is an actual change in life stage. You've been a larva for the first 40 to 45 years of your life, go into a cocoon, and then emerge in your adult form based on your accumulated life experiences. Ooh. Have you been watching the movie Chef on repeat? I like that. I like that as mechanics with almost, seeing your cocoon, your chrysalis here. And this is kind of weird. You have your tableau with your life experiences. Built out around it. Tableau tuning, I guess. So you're putting cards in, you start out with some cards, maybe a career, family, hobby 1, hobby 2, house, home, location. So these different factors you're building your tableau, and you might start out, career doctor, family married, knitting, maybe you're in Los Angeles, biking, right? And then over time you're changing this, so you had your family card, your family place in here, so you lay another card on top of it, so now this one is married with kid, and then maybe going along, getting it. Maybe you want certain cards that might seem bad. You're in your shake-up time, in your crisis time. So maybe you get another card on top of it, divorced with kid, and then maybe divorced and remarried. This is interesting. I don't know yet how everything would end up coming together. Maybe you're stacking cards for conditions and some... Oh, and this is feeling life-esque, right? With your car, your things that you're carrying around. One kid, twins, you have 4 kids. And then you sub certain cards, cancel other cards out. So the married one goes away, and now you're divorced with all your kids. Or even just layered down. So you just have these layers of married, divorced, remarried. And I was thinking of the original tableau with your cards laid out like this. Maybe you could flip over your cards and it would create some sort of like flower picture. Your flower life picture. I love all the things in game design. There's a lot of things that have known terms. There's a lot of other things like flower life picture tableau. They don't have a term for them. Crisis and your flower. Tune your tableau with life events. Tune your tableau with life events, and then flip over the cards to reveal some sort of a pattern. Some things go better. Other things, I'm not 100% on that, but several interesting concepts we're playing around with here. Your life events, multiple married divorce, stack your kids, your hobbies could evolve. Pick up new ones, drop ones off, have benefits and consequences. This is more general life though, as opposed to midlife crises where it's like you completely rip something up. Legacy game. Rip up your life cards. Something more dramatic where you're completely reforming the face of your life. Which makes me think a little bit about titles. Midlife crisis. Legacy. Midlife legacy. Chef is a fun flick. It also happens to have all of the Iron Man actors in it for some reason. Oh, yeah. I think I saw the trailer for the... It just happens to has all the Iron Man. Just coincidence. Overcoming difficulties means you'll have greater defensive stats when you finish pupating. Oh, that's a good word. Pupating. There's that thing where the struggle of a butterfly breaking through the chrysalis makes it strong enough to survive. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Something like if they weren't, if you managed to have a butterfly develop. Oh, if you like open the cocoon or something, that's supposed to be bad if you help the butterflies. I mean, obviously you should spoiler alert, you should never interfere with the natural processes of wild animals. Get that out of the way right there. But I seem to remember reading something like if you help them emerge, like, oh, they're having such a tough time, having such a struggle. But it's very metaphorical, right? The struggle is what strengthens us and toughens us up. Emotions expressed through crises. So, comfort, discomfort, food trucks. Making faces at people. Making faces at people, the game. It's like pie face, but not terrifying. So we got some fun directions here. I think even like looking at something, I mean, we didn't talk too much. This is just one potential idea of a direction of forming your life. Chrysalis, right? Your creature. Man, I often with a lot of these ideas, I'm like, wow, if we could add a digital element to this. Because, like, if you have your chrysalis here, have it be the intersection, right, of these, the addition, the set of each of these stacks that you've created over time. And then it could reveal to be, like, that would be kind of cool, actually. I'm like, everything that we do, all the struggles, we have tough times, we make choices, you know, maybe they're good choices, maybe they're bad choices, and at the end, everybody emerges as a happy butterfly. So you might have purple wings, you might have blue wings, you might be like a tiny butterfly or a big butterfly, have big wings, little wings, but we all come out as happy little butterflies. Struggle was hard. But we made it through. And that right there is something emotional that you can mechanize. Just setting up for a game, setting up a game state could either be strategically difficult, or you could have a phase if you're thinking about this format again with different decks that you're using through the different stages. You know, phase 1 deck and everything's getting better and better, and then a phase 2 deck and everything is worse. Wow, that could be pretty intense, actually. Building your life. Building your life, emerging from your life. Phase 1. I mean, that, even with some very simple mechanics, that could be a pretty interesting tableau-y sort of a thing. Phase 1, all the cards are good. You're getting a house with a pool, having kids, getting a promotion at your job, buying a new car. Phase 2, all the cards are quote-unquote bad. You know, don't want to value judgment here, but seeing the arc of your story of people getting divorced, family members dying. I mean, that's, like, that really changes the tone of the game. And, I mean, having a game where that is a thing, like life, I don't think any of your people die in life. I'm trying to remember. I don't think so, because it feels like that would have been really intense, but just putting that in there, right? It's like, in a game where it's like your parents, your spouse, child, even though it's horrible as that sounds, like that would be a pretty intense emotional game. I don't know if that's a game that I would want to design or I would be ready to design, but having that be a thing that could happen would definitely be different than what a lot of games do. And I think too, it's interesting, you know, because lots of games will deal with maybe you have a party of people and someone in the party dies, or it's a combat game, right? So you're fighting against each other, magic, right? Someone's life goes to 0, someone dies, but it doesn't really have that same emotional impact as when it happens to a friend or family member. Job, drug addiction, I mean, there's all sorts of things that could happen there. Phase 3 resolution. So it could be like that. Like, that's a little intense. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Just that's one direction to go. Resolution. Or alternately, if we're doing more of the midlife crisis, phase 1 is stagnation cards. Phase 2 is dramatic action and consequence cards. Buy a Ferrari. Lose kids' college fund. I don't know why things are getting so dark here. I guess it's not dark, just deep, emotionally impactful. Lose kids' college fund. But I think there's like, and this is something I played around with and then we died, is, you know, death is a subject that we don't really talk about, and it's not a game about talking about death, but just that arc of, you know, it's just a day in the life. You start out and you're just having this day and it's the last day of your lives and you're talking about that. I think just talking about some of these things sometimes can be good, can be healthy, can not necessarily feel good, you know, not make you happy in the moment, but lead to greater understanding of yourself and humanity. Senior Bob, Life Chrysalis, yes. Excellent job with our titling there. There's that thing where the struggle, yeah, we talked about that. Life Chrysalis, perfect. Unless it's not so much starting from a blank tableau and building your life, what if you got a random deal of cards to date and the game is going from there to a completely different end state? Yeah, those are thinking that you wouldn't choose them. I mean, that's very life, like the game of life, right? Thing where you're just like starting from scratch and building out your life. This is gonna sound really dramatic. Your life tableau is randomly dealt, so it's like you're stuck with what you got. Getting totally bailed out by your parents makes you not as emotionally strong. And the other thing to consider, what makes some of these things tricky is value judgments. You know, I think it's interesting, for better or worse. You know, I think it can be very interesting to see the ways different people value certain things, condemn certain things, right? Like, speaking about like being bailed out by your parents, there's two sides to the coin, right? There's, you know, the trope, typical spoiled kid who never has to suffer any consequences and goes through life making terrible decisions because they've never had to feel bad a day in their life. And then on the other hand, there's the millennial person who's saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars of college debt because everyone told them to go to college, and they did that, and now they have debt and a job that doesn't make hundreds of thousands of dollars because most jobs don't. And now they're living with their parents and being supported by their parents and the changing of lifestyles over time. Game Auto says, there's a certain amount of how did I get here you experience in a midlife crisis. Make that real and just randomly deal out a life. You see, that's very interesting. That's a good point. Right? I think that's a core part of it's like, Senior Bob, you had mentioned earlier, there's, instead of the uncertainty, there's the certainty, right? There's fear in uncertainty. But in a midlife crisis, there's fear and certainty. Certainty. So just knowing, you know, I'm going to go to this job every day for the rest of my life. Like, I'm going to come home. I'm going to watch this show. So yeah, there's the certainty of it. And then, I guess, the uncertainty in the past. As opposed to a younger person's uncertainty about the future. Fear and certainty of the future. So this how did I get here sort of, because you can look back, right, at all the things, the choices, hindsight is 20/20. He's like, logically, well, this happened and this happened, but, you know, where you thought you were going to end up and where you did end up didn't line up. You know, it's like, oh, well, I thought, you know, I was going to do this for a little while, and my plan was always to do X, you know, but now I'm so far off. Like, my plan was to join a band and tour the country, for example, but I started waitressing to make ends meet, and then I met someone, you know, and got a better job, and then we had a kid, you know, so you can trace back and see that, but you're like, but I had this plan, I never changed my plan. I guess I wasn't able to enact my plan, and what does that mean about me as a person? Time to research famous life philosophers. Yeah, we're philosophizing a lot here. We're getting very philosophical. Gimbal just says, going back to Fog of Love, the way they use a set of personality characteristics as metrics might be a better fit than a single VP calculation. Because they have the different tracks for different, like, dominant, submissive. I forget exactly what the board looks like for that, but you have resources that you move around. Who does the player want to be at the end, and how close to that can they get? Poor and spiritually fulfilled might be as much of a win condition as rich and pretty, depending on what a player values. I think something interesting about this particular topic is steps or evolution. So it's usually not a leap, right? I mean, some people will take a leap of faith and make a dramatic change, but it's usually not just one change and then everything's better or everything's fine or you just stop there, right? It's a series of changes, series of events. So I like the idea of like evolving goals. You get to a point and see how your life has changed. And then you have different possible destinations based on that. So we're talking about tableau and cards here, but it could be, ooh, I kind of like, I don't know, some weird, crazy, like, web board with, like, your, man, I'm, like, picturing something. This is why it's good to practice drawing and be an artist, because I'm, like, seeing something in my mind's eye, this, like, rotating shape. But these, like, web things with nodes. Nodes, and they stretch out into different directions. Again, potentially a little easier to implement digitally, but all of these are chits or mini cards. So your options, basically what I'm coming down to is your options. When you change something, you make a choice, you go in a direction, like your future option change. I don't know how that beats represent. Seems like it might be kind of fiddly in a board state, but it's representative of real life, right? Your future options change, and they might be like face down, maybe different decks, face down chits. So you might pre-lay out the board with numbers. Or cards, random assortment of choices based on. So I think an example would help with this. So you're in your starting state, right? And you do the options. And these could be randomly dealt to keep things interesting game to game. Buy the new car, set up a college fund for your kid, take an expensive vacation with your partner, right? So you have a few different options of the things that you can do. And once you've done that, each of these will have their own deck. Again, layout-wise, definitely sounds like it could get a little tricky. But if you could get it to work, I think it would be a cool, fun concept. So you choose. Ooh. We do mostly talk about tabletop game design here, or most of the games I work on specifically are tabletop. Happy to work on and discuss different styles of games as well. But the branching narrative type of thing would also work really well with Twine, which is a cool tool. I think it's still around. I haven't played around with it in a while. But you can do very simple node diagrams, mostly for interactive stories, but there's a lot of coding options as well. So you make some really cool stuff. I've seen people do basically design a game, as long as there's not like 3D or lots of characters moving around. You can go from scene to scene. So you could at least prototype something like this in Twine with the branching paths. So you choose to buy a car, opens up 3 new options that may take into consideration the things you gave up. Maybe you're dealt one at random. This could be a gameplay loop. Where you go back and forth. between choosing an option and getting a consequence. So for this one, you've chosen to buy a car, and there's 3 options. Maybe you get to choose, maybe one's dealt randomly, but you, you know, have a fight with your spouse because you didn't go on the vacation together, or because you didn't invest in the kid's college fund. You, maybe like the new car is something that your partner or your kid can bond over, so you like choose to bond with one family member over car. So you bought it kind of selfishly maybe, but it ends up being good for your relationships. Or maybe you get a promotion at work. You know, things happen randomly, right? Like someone's like, you got a fancy car. Someone's like, oh, this person's got good style. I like their style. Get into a fancy country club or something. So some mix of positive and negative consequences. Again, the idea, I don't want it to be a value judgy thing. I think with anything like this, we're trying to make a game out of exploring an emotional experience. You don't want it to be proselytizing, right? You don't want to be judging people for their life choices and saying like, oh, you bought a car instead of investing in your kid's college fund. Now they'll never go to college and, you know, everything's going to be the worst. It's like, well, maybe that car, like, it ends up being a really good thing in your life. Maybe you go for long drives in the country and it reduces your stress and you decide you don't need a career change and you work better at your job and you get a promotion because of that. Like, life works in mysterious ways. Oh, Game says the current version of Twine is like 2.2 for tabletop. House of Danger implemented branching narrative with cards. Oh yeah, House of Danger, which I play tested at Force Brazan. Such a fun experience. I was so excited when I saw that. We get to see the games before they're even announced, right? And yeah, they're like, this is a choose your own adventure game. It's like, as someone who grew up reading choose your own adventure books, I'm like, oh, this is the best thing ever. So I was like, I was gonna like the game, like no matter how it ended up being. And they did a great job with they got someone to like make a font, design a font that was very similar. The art style was very similar. The writing, all of it was really well done. And they definitely managed to do it in a pretty non-fiddly way. I think part of it, it all comes back. So the way they designed House of Danger is you have your branching paths, but it all comes, so it starts in each chapter, starts in one place, always starts in the same place, always ends in the same place. You're going to go different directions. When you get to the page before the last page, I think, you have an option to, I haven't played the final version yet, but I'm pretty sure it still works this way, have an option to go back to another section. So you can't go back through everything, but it's like, you know, the finger in the Choose Your Own Adventure book holding your place, so you go back and replay and try and gather some more items or see a little bit more of the story. And yeah, they managed to do it, especially within the framework of a Choose Your Own Adventure story. I could see, as it's the kind of thing you're probably not going to play through a bunch of times, so keeping everything together is pretty straightforward, but there's, with reorganizing all the pages and making sure everything is together, can get a little bit tricky. Sarah Bob says, TC Petty has an unpublished game called Club Zen, where you're trying to raise your relaxation level. Ooh, I like that. Sarah also played the second Choose Your Own Adventure game. It has some of the dubious 80s more. Wait, is there a second one? adventure board game. Because the House of Danger, oh, is the Master War with the Evil Power Master. Was that out already? Oh, you must have played it at a convention or something. I saw that on the Gen Con preview list. I was like, oh my gosh, they had their second one coming out. The Dubious 80s Morality. Yeah. You're not wrong. I mean, they licensed the actual Choose Your Own Adventure IP, and they're mostly building off of stories. I think some of the titles are the same, or they're using a lot of that stuff, and yeah, there's some questionable stuff. I know when I was doing the play testing for the House of Danger, I mentioned some of the stuff about gender in there, about the characters, and like, you know, some of the villains could be where there's the one woman in there, and that's good, but maybe like some more women in there as well. That's tough. I mean, you have the nostalgia for these things, but I'm sure if I went back and read those books that I read now, I'd be like, whoa, that's not cool anymore. So yeah, it's tough. It's kind of a bummer. Yeah, the Game Biologist you said about premiering at Gen Con, that's actually speaking of which, I'm gonna share, since I made this, I'm gonna be talking about this on Table Takes as well. Gen Con preview list. I'm in a list of the games that I'm excited about at Gen Con. Interestingly, if you are looking, and this is the one on BGG, if you're looking at that list, premiere is a very loose term. So they have stuff on that list that's demos, that's not even purchasable yet. So like 6 to 10 months in the future, and things that have been in retail for months. So Planet, for example, I think I first saw Planet at Mox at least a month or two ago, and that's premiering, or that's on the Gen Con preview list. So it's a very wide range of things. So there's definitely some stuff on there that's already available at retail, which is interesting and kind of weird, but also like it makes sense, because having something premiere at Gen Con, people see it as like, oh, this game is new. They might not have seen it or heard about it before. So there's a lot of wiggle room for releasing of games in that way. Game Out says, I bought the House of Danger book after playing the game and was amazed at how quickly the book and game plots diverged. Yeah, that there's definitely just working the mechanics in there and having a coherent mechanical thing that you're working from. I haven't read the actual House of Danger book, but I'm pretty sure they started from the original concept and very quickly ended up being like, okay, well, we have to have certain things and story beats and things that we can turn into encounters and that use the stats that we've created. And I think there's just less in the game than there is in the books, because it takes a while to get through everything. But that's interesting. I'm pretty sure that, you know, for a little bit of modernization and mechanization, that's probably why they made those changes to that. Okay. Did we make a game? Did we come up with something? Come up with a game? Mostly came up with, like, you're a cat, you're gonna come over here and start poking me again. We came up with like 50% of a game design concept. That's enough, right? It's enough to prototype from. Here. Oh, yeah. So as Fezzik is here to join us as we get ready to finish up with today's stream. I think there's a lot of stuff to work from here, it's been very helpful for me because I am excited about digging a little bit more into light mechanization of some of these more emotional experiences, personal and emotional things that can be gamified, right? Let's just turn it all to a game and make profit out of it. But that's not the point, right? The point is to talk about and share these emotional experiences. And I think a lot of times the thing we don't talk about, midlife crisis, you know, it's in the media, but having interesting, serious conversations, or life paths, right? Choosing what you're going to do with your life, having regrets, not having regrets, making choices other people don't agree with. I think that there's a lot of fun stuff there to explore, and it's something I encourage any designer to do, because like I said, I just want to play more weird, maybe indie, like emotional experience. I want like 50 games like holding on so I can play all of them and be like, oh, the way I felt when I ate this cheesecake in this one game was cool, and the way I felt when I had to give my dog up for adoption in this other game was really tough. And just to be able to have those interesting conversations. Not that existing strategic mechanical games don't also inspire interesting conversations, but it's like we have so many of those. We can have more of those, but I want to explore the boundaries and see what else is possible. Oh gosh. Bits, Senior Bob, thanks for the bits. Is that for Fezzik? Are those his bits? He is pretty cute, right? He's very mad right now. He does not like being snuggled. Yeah, you got some bits. What do you think about that? Yeah, this is what you wanted, right? This is why you came over to hang out. You want to say hi to everyone. Senior Bob says, I happen to have an original copy of House of Danger from Goodwill. Oh, that's awesome. I don't know if I ever owned any Choose Your Own Adventure books. I don't know, like, where I would have bought them. I feel like Goodwill. I think Goodwill is a great example. The place where Choose Your Own Adventure books came from was from Goodwill, was from the library, those dog-eared copies that had the yellow tape on them. They smelled like books from the library. Choose Your Own Adventure books, they feel like relics from another time, right? They've just existed forever. Like, you couldn't acquire them new. You had to find them used in some way. Okay, that's enough torture. Okay, you're done. I'm just gonna be covered in cat hair. It's great. Senior Bob, story scenario. Parting with a longtime friend. Oh man, again, just like one of the most sorry, I'm just so excited about this. It's hard to contain my excitement. You pitched that game to me. So like, we're gonna have a play game. You talk about pitching any game, right? So we're gonna play this game. You're truck drivers delivering milk to different cities. You're trying to deliver the most milk. There's different economic systems. Like, okay, cool. That sounds kind of cool. You pitch the story like, we're going to play a game where you have a friendship and the friendship falls apart. Or, I guess, you said parting with a longtime friend. It could either be the friendship falls apart, or you have to say goodbye for some reason. Maybe the reason isn't determined. For some reason, you have to say goodbye to a longtime friend. Death, moving away, maybe just temporary, permanent, the friendship ends dramatically, maybe you drift apart, maybe there's opportunity for reconciliation. And again, this isn't the kind of a game where you're like have piles of your resource cubes. You know, you have like your heart cubes and you're trading them over here, and then your compatibility tokens. You know, you got a bunch going on here, or maybe potentially. But I'm seeing just like lightly mechanical storytelling. Some really interesting, unique blend of the ease and shortness of a board game that's maybe like half an hour to an hour, and then a storytelling game where you have a lot of flexibility, maybe a little bit of a role-playing game, something maybe a little more mechanized than a storytelling game. So I like storytelling games too. I think the ones that we have mostly, and that's what I like about And Then We Died, is that it's light and fast. I think a lot of times storytelling game just ends up being closer to like a one-shot. It's like, well, it's still 2 to 3 hours long to do the whole storytelling game. I think there's space for that too. But telling a story within the space of a party game, you know, something you can play in 45 minutes, something that's easy to teach and learn. It doesn't take as much creativity, because I think that can be a limitation for story games as well. And Then We Died is pretty good for that, but I could see another game being even more mechanical and more directed. More mechanical, more directed experience than your traditional storytelling game. Storytelling. Came out, it says, I got Choose Your Own Adventure books at Walden Books and Dalton Bookseller back in the day. When they were new, you got new Choose Your Own Adventure books? That's fancy. You're fancy. Okay, Senior Bob, I was initially thinking of moving away from each other. Yeah. So the story... I like something a little more subtle like that, when you say that. The story of saying goodbye, not forever, to a dear friend. So scenarios, events, you know, you go to the coffee shop, maybe you're feeling very intense emotions, so you go out and have coffee and you have a great conversation, you feel good, and then you get home and you think about them leaving and you feel bad, like this roller coaster of emotion. Oh, game biologist, I'm just looking over here in the chat. It says, when I was in 6th grade, and I'm thinking it's going to tie into what we're talking about here. I'm like, oh, my heart already feels it's going to be really sad. I don't know yet, but I'm just going to go ahead and read what it says. When I was in 6th grade, my family moved suddenly without telling anyone where we used to live. So my dad's boss wouldn't fire him until he packed up the house. I got to write letters to a friend back home, but couldn't say I wasn't coming back. I was sort of saying goodbye without her knowing I was saying goodbye. Wow. I'm like, oh my gosh. See, this is what I was saying right in the beginning of the stream. Just feel this feeling of emotions. You know, it's good and it's bad and it's tough and it's powerful, and love to be able to see more. Plop it half an hour, right? Just like in the time it takes you to play 20 minutes. This Sushi Go. It's like we're playing Sushi Go. It's like we're playing Never See Your Friend Again, the game, and 20 minutes from now you're gonna sit back and be like, whoa, what just happened? And tickle that like strategic, meaningful choices part of your brain at the same time. Because that's what we get out of wanting it to be a game specifically, as opposed to interactive fiction, which is also great and a lot of fun, but it's not a game. Tickle that satisfy that meaningful choices urge we get out of games. Because in interactive fiction, you'll make choices, not that they aren't meaningful, but you could make either one. You know, you're exploring as opposed to weighing the choices, which I think makes a game a little bit different. Okay, wow. That was fun. That was intense. Got a little bit emotional there, but thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all go out and make really cool, unique, boundary-breaking, story-esque, but still mechanical games, things we can play, things not necessarily where you win or lose. I don't think that that's core for a game, but where you are making meaningful choices and where you can play through it again and make different choices. So it's a unique experience every time. I'm going to keep thinking about this. I'm not sure that there's a lot of interesting stuff here. I might be able to suss out a direction for this, but got a lot of stuff to think about what I want to work on, what I want to design next from all of this. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. It's been lots of fun. I hope everyone had fun today. I will be back on Friday for a casual gaming stream, some Magic, probably some Teamfight Tactics, which we've been having a lot of fun with. And then back next Tuesday as well with another game design stream. In the meantime, you can follow me here on Twitch if you'd like to see more of these fun streams. I post the videos to YouTube if you want to check them out there. I'm also at Emma Larkins on Twitter if you want to chat about game design there. Yeah, so have a great rest of your week, and I will talk with you again soon.